So, the winning run is at second base, with 2 out. 3-2 to Mookie Wilson. Little roller up along first, behind the bag. It gets through Buckner. Here comes Remember That Guy, the podcast where we mine our memories for nuggets of nostalgia about peripheral players, past and present. Hey, I'm your host, James.
I'm Diaz. Great intro, James. Very happy with that intro. And I'm also very happy that we have with us, fresh off of his long holdout and ready to make his first public appearance since Game 7 against the Atlanta Hawks, Ben Simmons is here to remember some guys with us. Oh, no,
Ben
wait.
Simmons.
Wait. Just like in the playoffs, Ben decided not to show up. So instead, we're going to have to go back to everybody's favorite special guest. Please introduce yourself.
That's right. It's me. Daryl Morey has called in very special guest Xavier Perez off the bench.
We needed to find someone that hated Trae Young as much as both Diaz and Ben Simmons, and you were the next person up, X. Believe it or not.
That makes sense.
I think he's pretty great. I'm not gonna lie. I actually really genuinely enjoy Trae Young.
Well, the thing is, and like this will eventually segue well into what our topic is today. I love villains. Villains are so important in sports. You can't just have the good guys. You need to have the people that you hate. Because if they're all good guys, then none of them are good guys. We need the villains. Fuck Trae Young. I'm glad he exists.
There you go. I'll go ahead and kick off people that are making memories for me on that note real quick. Because a villain was slain. There's a villain that was finally put to rest. It was a long time coming, but thank you. We never have to watch Ben Roethlisberger play football again. Thank you, God. We never have to watch Ben Roethlisberger play football again. And that's fine. We will, at some point, have to see when he is incorrectly put into the Hall of Fame, and that'll suck. But he is never going to play on a football field again. Ding dong, the witch is dead. That's all I got to say. It's a fun memory that's being made for me right now.
Legally, he could have been considered dead on the field for about 2 seasons at this point, because truthfully, he has not been able to throw a football more than, I would say, probably 30 yards in the air.
I think that's still generous to him. I think the spray chart he had his last couple of games was 90% of the passes were within 5 yards of the line of scrimmage. So
if you had Najee Harris in PPR this year, you were killing because every single throw is a check down.
Full dink and dunks. Look, I'm not going to talk too much shit. He killed us many times. He killed us one last time. He's gone. He's just gone. Like, I heard a couple Ravens fans there say, "Oh, you got to hand it to." No, I don't. He's gone. I couldn't be happier. I'm so glad that I'll never have to see that guy take the field again. Thank you, Lord Jesus.
Get him out of here.
And yeah, he's not a Hall of Famer. Just for the record, he's not Hall of Fame quality. He just isn't.
We will litigate that further at a future date. James does have a very compelling case.
He's gonna get in. I'll start with that. He will get in. He shouldn't, though.
I feel the same way about Eli Manning as an Eagles fan. I don't think there's any argument for Eli Manning to get in other than the fact that his last name is Manning and he managed to win 2 Super Bowls. But say la fucking V, right?
I do have to say real quick, if Peyton Manning hadn't won Super Bowl 50, how funny would it be that Eli Manning would have more rings than Peyton Manning?
There is a part of me that's upset about that because it is...
Cam Newton would be a champion if that had happened. There are many parts of me that are upset about that.
As a person that loves humor, it would have been the greatest troll in the history of sports if the dumb little brother had twice as many Super Bowls as arguably, not anymore, but during his career, people would have argued he could have been the greatest quarterback of all time.
It's all right. Arch Manning will get 4 and make his uncles feel like crap.
Good. Cooper needs a win. So I'm rooting for Arch.
Cooper does need a win. Yeah, that's a villain who will never make another memory for me again. But it's a good way for him to go out. Any good feelings like that for you all right now? Any good Schadenfreude?
I got one, and depending on who you ask, this person might be a villain. But I wanted to give a shout out to former UConn men's basketball coach Kevin Ollie, who Diaz and I saw lead UConn to the national championship game in person down in Texas in 2014. Kevin Ollie just won his arbitration case for improper termination by UConn, and they have to pay him $11 million within the next 10 business days.
What?
And I'm not sure anyone will have 10 better
business
days than Kevin Ollie. So
that's
shout out to Kevin
1.1
Ollie
million
getting that
per
bag.
business day.
How many IOUs do you hand out in those 10 days? Like, how many? Look, I promise. Give me till Friday. I'm good for it.
The thing is, UConn's broke as it is. Their athletic department budget deficit was $47 million last year.
This is a public school. Is this gonna like affect the state budget? Do they have to have like a line item thing in the state assembly of Connecticut saying this is when we accidentally ended up $11 million short on the budget because we lost an arbitration case?
Yes.
Hey, Connecticut politicos, sorry about that.
I mean, without knowing the legal arguments that were made, just on a surface level, this motherfucker won you a championship. What are you doing firing him? Like, I don't care anything else. I don't care about the legalese. I don't care about like any of that. Man won you a championship. In my opinion, a championship should get you. You could go winless for the next 5 seasons, and in the 6th season, it should still be. Well, let's see what he's got. He did win us a championship. Like,
as a 7 seed too, it's not like that was a magical run that we happened to be there to see, and then UConn self-reported a bunch of violations and said, "Hey, Kevin Ollie was around when we had these violations. We're going to fire you and not pay you," and now they have to pay him.
So the thing I remember most from that run is there was the Kemba goes off UConn championship, and then there was the Shabazz goes off, which is that one, 2014. And Shabazz went off so hard that LeBron, with the Heat still at the time, was like openly campaigning for the Heat to draft him. And sure enough, the Heat did in the first round, well overdrafted him. And then LeBron, like 2 weeks later, was like, "Peace, I'm going back to Cleveland." I thought that was hilarious because that pick was purely pandering to LeBron. And 2 weeks later, he was like, "Thanks for the pander. I'll see you later."
There will be a day after LeBron's career where we don't have to defend him anymore against like people who want to take away from his greatness, and we can take some time to really dissect a lot of the very, frankly, villainous things that LeBron James has done.
He went full heel in those Heat years, which I loved. Like, I've always been a very big basketball fan, don't get me wrong, but that Heat era of hating the Heat really, really got me super into basketball, where like I would say it was my number 2 behind football for a while, and ever since it's been my number 1 sport. Like, that was just such a golden era.
The 2013 Spurs run cemented me as a Spurs fan. Like, the Ray Allen shot is why I'm a Spurs fan. Feeling the gutting pain of the Ray Allen 3 is what stuck me to the Spurs forever.
Again, that's we're sickos here. When Newcastle got relegated in like my 3rd season of rooting for them, that was when I was like, okay, this is my team now.
And now they're worth more money than the entire world, so
Still might get relegated again, which I think personally, I don't want us to get relegated. It would be hilarious if the richest club in the world was in the 2nd division.
Yeah, you'll be in the championship with Jesse Lingard, Diego Carlos, Alan St. Maximin,
Kieran Trippier,
Sven Botman, Kieran Trippier. It'll just be the richest team ever assembled, winning every game 10-0.
Sounds like a great season. Like, it will be followed by other things, but for one season, that sounds awesome.
I would rather stay up, but dominating the championship would be a good consolation. And, I'll take that to segue into who's making memories for me. I did jinx him as I predicted I was doing, as I was doing it. Unfortunately, in that Friday night game against the Celtics, he won by too much. He had 25 points with like 7 minutes left in the 4th, and they just sat him. But last night, Joel Embiid, the most incredible offensive single game performance I have ever seen from a Sixer in my 29 and counting years of following that team. I just want to run through some of the fun facts of last night. In 27 minutes, Joel Embiid had 50 points and 10 rebounds. That is the least amount of minutes played in NBA history in a 50-10 game. There is only one player to score more points while playing less than 28 minutes. It is Klay Thompson when he hit 14 three-pointers, setting the NBA record. Joel Embiid needed 1 three-pointer last night. He made 13 less threes than Klay did and still got the 50 points. Tied his career high. After that performance last night, he is now the all-time NBA leader in points per minute or points per 36 minutes. It's the exact same statistic. Math. Like it's beyond description at this point. I personally like to dabble in hyperbole. There's no hyperbole I can state as to how incredible Joel Embiid is. There's never been a player at that size that can do what he does. There was a great video that was going around social media before last night, which was just cutting up, hey, here's Michael Jordan doing this move, here's Kobe doing that same move, and here's 7'2", 270-pound Joel Embiid doing the exact same move with the exact same handles. He's unreal. He's absolutely unreal. He's a unicorn. There's never been anybody like him. There will never be anybody like him. And it is the Sixers' duty to make sure that they win a championship with him on their roster. It is a failure if they do not. Joel Embiid, I love you. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll shoot Daryl Morey a text. I'll text him back, let him know you really got to maximize this year for Joel.
Please, yeah. Tell Daryl that he should win a championship. He hasn't thought of that.
My favorite stat from last night's Sixers game was that Joel Embiid had 20 points in a quarter, and in that same quarter, the Philadelphia 76ers had 22 points.
Oh, it was so stupid. The first half was just so frustrating because it was like, wow, Embiid is the greatest player in the universe, and we're down 10 to the fucking Orlando Magic. And then in the third quarter, Heat was just like, okay, I'll have another 20-point quarter. This time, you guys just got to defend a fucking little bit. And they did.
Didn't they give up like a career high in points to Mo Bamba in the first half?
Mo Bamba was ridiculous last night. He went 8 of 9 from 3. And so that's like another fun like side wrinkle to this is Embiid did it going largely against Mo Bamba, also Robin Lopez. But Embiid and Bamba both work out together with Drew Hanlon in the offseason. Mm-hmm. So there was certainly some familiarity there where Bamba's gone against Embiid so much, he felt empowered to shoot confidently. And then on the flip side, Embiid knows that he can just move Mo Bamba out of the way like a small child anytime that he wants to. I mean, he did it routinely last night. In the low post, in the mid-range, only three-pointer he hit was a ridiculous like side step back, like 28-footer over Robin Lopez. He's 7'2" doing this. Like, what the fuck? Anybody, and this is the last thing that I want to say about it, anybody that says that Nikola Jokic is better than Joel Embiid needs to get their fucking heads out of the stat sheets and actually watch a game of basketball. Because Embiid can do everything that Jokic does, and Jokic can do maybe half of the shit that Embiid does. People about, the VORP, or the BPM, or the blah, blah, blah. I don't fucking care. Watch the sport. Appreciate greatness. Nikola Jokic is very good, and he's a very good
I think he's a better passer than Joel Embiid. I want to just make sure I'm on record as saying Nikola Jokic is a better passer.
He is.
Joel Embiid's a much better player. Yeah, no doubt that Joel Embiid is a better player. Nikola Jokic, though, may be the best passer in the league, so I don't want to take that away from him.
It is a center renaissance. I want to say that. Like, look,
absolutely.
In a neutral world where I don't need to defend Embiid as being better than Nikola Jokic, I love Nikola Jokic. But in a world where people think that he's better than Joel Embiid, he is fucking trash. He's goddamn Eastern European who's not good at basketball, and I hate him. And he should go back to Eastern Europe. And he can be the best player in Eastern Europe, but he's not going to be the best player in the NBA because that's Joel Embiid.
Brothers are going to hear this podcast somehow, and you're going to get like a threatening message.
If this gets them to reactivate their Twitter, I consider that a win, personally.
I'm on record as saying I think Nikola Jokic is one of the best passers in the NBA, so I'm okay with that.
I love Jokic. I as a Knicks fan, I don't have to have Embiid defense, so I can just say that I love Nikola Jokic. I think he's fantastic. I really liked when he pushed whichever Morris twin down.
I think that was Marcus, and dude, Marcus hasn't played since.
Yeah, he's still hurt, which is wild.
Wild.
Like I'm shocked that he's still hurt, but I also still enjoyed when it happened, which probably makes me a bad person.
No, I mean,
we're going to talk about later.
That's what it is. Let's just dive right into it. I really kind of thought about this because my lovely partner Jesse has pointed out that we bring a lot of positivity to this. We try to talk about people that we love. There are a lot of other fascinating people in the world, and some of them are terrible, terrible people. And since it was my call for the category this week, I went with just simply villains. I want us to really just get into some sacks of crap. Some absolute sacks of crap. And want to make it clear as we go into it. They're bad. They're bad people. But since I'm leaning it off, I'll go ahead and go in because the person that I found, I think they are one of the greatest villains in baseball history. I think they are indisputably a top 10 baseball villain all time. And it's not because they are just despicable. Like, despicable that's not enough. Like, you can't just hate a good villain. There has to be other angles. There has to be some level of tragedy. It has to make sense. The villainy has to make sense, and I think it really does. In the case of Marge Schott, do either of you remember Marge Schott?
Yes.
Marge
Yes.
Schott.
Yes, I do.
We're not going with an athlete. This is an entry from the builders category. I'm pulling all kinds of crazy moves out of my pocket here, but it's my category this week, so we're just going
Poor
with
Cincinnati.
Yeah, I have brought Marge Schott, who is, as you said, from Cincinnati. She was the owner of the Cincinnati Reds from 1984 until 1999. For 15 years, she was the owner of the Cincinnati Reds, and during that time, she offended pretty much everybody. We could go ahead and just lead off with, I think, the two worst things she's done, just to make sure everyone kind of gets a sense of what's coming. Marge Schott is of German heritage. There are a couple Nazi-related incidents with her. There's one in particular that I think kind of sums it all up. There was a director of marketing for the Cincinnati Reds, Cal Levy, who was a Jewish gentleman. He was over at Marge's house. They had a as amicable as it could be with Marge Schott relationship, and he's in her house, and he finds a family heirloom, which is a Nazi armband that belonged to some member of her family at some point, because she was an old German family. She had this, and her response when he brought it, said, like, "Hey, what's this?" She's like, "Oh, of course the Jewish guy found it." So that's Marge Schott. Another thing that I think really sums it up, early on in her career, in 1984, when she took over the team, they had just made a trade for one of the highest paid players in baseball at the time, Dave Parker. Dave Parker is the second ever $1 million player. Here's a quick trivia question. Do either of you know the first $1 million player in baseball?
Was it Reggie?
It was not Reggie Jackson. It's a good guess. Similar time frame.
It's too old to be Pete Rose, or too late to be Pete Rose.
It is not Pete Rose. It is Nolan Ryan. Nolan Ryan is the first $1 million player.
That does make sense.
Yeah, Nolan Ryan's the first $1 million player. And then number 2, Dave Parker. Problem is that at one point he was referred to by Marge Schott as her $1 million N-word. And so that's Marge Schott. Just to make sure we know where we're kicking it off from. Not a good person. But again, it wouldn't be, if she was just this hateful person, I would not have brought Donald Sterling to this. Donald Sterling has said as bad, if not worse things. Donald Sterling has no redeeming qualities whatsoever. I'm not even going to necessarily say that Marge Schott has redeeming qualities. But let me tell you a little bit about Marge Schott to maybe, once again, explain the villainy. Give you an idea of where it comes from and why it makes sense. She's from Cincinnati, born in the 1920s, and she is born to the Univers. That is Charlotte and Edward Henry Univer. I'm not entirely sure if I'm pronouncing this correctly. It's a German word. There's a W in it, and it's EH, so I think it's Univer. We don't have to say it for too long, because that is her maiden name, and we will move on from it. But it was a big name in Cincinnati at the time. Her father, Edward Henry Univer, was a big lumber guy. This is, Ohio at the turn of the 19th century. There's a huge amount of construction going on, and he's got all this plywood money, baby. The plywood business is raking it in hand over fist. And all he wants in life is a son to make into his little business protege to take it over. And so, of course, he and his wife have 5 daughters, and not a single boy, and it does kind of drive him a little nuts. And so her dad, Edward Henry Univer, starts off kind of the descent of Marge Schott by descending. Marge is basically going to be the son. Just going to make Marge Schott the girl equivalent of his son. This gets a little complicated because at the same time, they're very German Catholic. And German Catholic is very, very specific brand of Catholic. We here on the East Coast, where we all live, we see Hispanic Catholic and we see Irish Catholic. German Catholic, though, it's a little intense. It's very regimented. It's very, if you've ever listened to the old German folklore tales, you have to be good. The dad wouldn't even eat with the kids until they were 4 or older because they were too messy before then. So he would take his meal elsewhere. It was a fucked up household.
That's psychopathic.
Yeah, no, absolutely. As Marge Schott put it, a very Achtung household. We're not getting off to a good start for old Marge, or as Dad would often call her, Butch. And he's calling her that as
Jesus! You're saying this about your own daughter, bro. What the fuck?
No, and I want to say that's not what he's not calling her that as an adjective. That is the name that he would refer to as when he brought her to meetings, because he's bringing her along. He's like, okay, Marge is going to be the one that takes over the business. So he's bringing her to all the meetings. He's encouraging her at a young age to drink and smoke cigars. And so when I talk in any Marge Schott quotes going forward, I'm going to try and do it in the voice that Marge Schott had for most of her life, because she's smoking cigars as a teenager and then keeps that up for all of her life. Her dad really does a number on her. At the same time, though, the reason I bring up the Catholic thing is he's, making her this, oh, you have to be the business-minded one. But it's also a constant focus on, oh, well, you're still a woman. Like, you still need to produce a family. That is your essential function, just about making babies for a family. And so that is still very much on her mind. So she does at one point go ahead and get married. She gets married to the man that will give her last name, Charles Schott, who is from a wealthy Cincinnati society area. This is, of course, devastating to her father, because now she's not going to run that business. No, what she's going to do instead is work in the Schott business. Charles Schott, her husband, the second major man in her life, is also quite terrible. He does leave on the wedding night to go get drink and play cards, reportedly. He's not good. He's not very good at business either. But his dad...
I mean, your wedding is supposed to be the happiest day of your life, and if what's going to make him happy is drinking and playing cards with his boys, it would be pretty selfish of Marge to not let him go do that, would it not?
He had his own wedding with blackjack, and you know the rest.
We will get to that later, but it very well may have included both of those things that Mr. Bender Bending Rodriguez would suggest. The good news for Marge Schott, well, I don't know if there's any good news for Marge Schott at any point, but the other news for Marge Schott regarding this wedding is she does now have a very influential father-in-law. Walter Schott is the money for the family. Walter Schott, by 1938, has more car dealerships in the Cincinnati area than anybody else. And Walter Schott gives her even more of a business training in terms of like, hey, here's where the tax loopholes are. Hey, here's where the write-offs are. Hey, this is how you become stingy and grow wealthy through that stinginess. That's going to very much become part of her mindset. She also gets brought along to meetings by Walter Schott. Imagine your father-in-law brings his daughter-in-law to the meetings instead of his son, and just has her kind of, crack one-liners as Marge Schott. So she's just entertaining the guys, and then as soon as the meeting starts, he's like, now be quiet. You are still an other in this place. And again, she totally goes along with that. She agrees with that because in her head, she's still like, yeah, well, I'm learning all this stuff, but I still have to have a family with Charles Schott. And they do try. They are unsuccessful. They try many different procedures, many different medications. They just cannot start a family. So we're talking about the villainous backstory, the origin.
Did the doctors ever clarify if the smoking and drinking as a 10-year-old had anything to do with this? I'm just not a doctor.
I don't think they were looking for that at that point, but it's a good point. Here's the thing. That'll definitely get in the way of starting a family. What will get even more so in the way of you starting your family with your husband is if your husband dies of a heart attack in 1968 while in his mistress's bathtub.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if Marge wasn't gonna have a kid, I mean.
Well, so she is 39. She's widowed. She could certainly entertain other suitors. She said there were some, but everyone that was interested in her was already married. She was like, I never met so many people whose wives didn't understand them. She is apparently called by Harold Schott, who was Charles Schott's uncle, so her uncle-in-law. She was apparently called by him 6 times in one day. He was in Florida. He's calling her, later today, I'm getting on a flight. We're getting hitched. And then he's swimming and he has a heart attack and he drowns in Florida. And so she just never gets married again. And Marge Schott, from the age of 39 on, just gives up on having a family and instead has even more time to devote to her first true love, the Cincinnati Reds. They're one of the oldest baseball franchises in baseball. I have one little thing I want to share about the Cincinnati Reds because I learned today how the Reds were founded. So there had been an earlier Cincinnati ball club in the 1870s, in 1876. They got disbanded because they had the audacity to sell beer at their stadium during game. The gall to serve alcohol at a baseball game.
How dare
so they get disbanded. And there is this guy, O.P. Kaler. He's mad about this, so he's like, all right, we're going to get some people together. He finds this one other guy who had been the president of that Reds franchise, Justice Thorner, and they get an invitation from this Philadelphia businessman who hears that they're talking about starting another baseball team. Come to Pittsburgh. We're having a big meeting. Bunch of guys who are interested in making teams. We're going to make this happen. We're making another league to compete with the National League. Thorner and Kaler go. No one else shows up. But they run into this one pitcher that they know. And this pitcher connects them to the guy that had the Pittsburgh team that was disbanded, the Alleghenies. And this guy, H. Denny McKnight, Kaler, and Thorner. They're like, hey, here's what we'll do. We'll send a telegraph to everyone that was supposed to be at this meeting, and we'll say that each person was the only one who didn't go, and that everyone who was there is totally in agreement. So just give us your sign off, and we're good to go for unanimous. And they send that same telegraph to everybody, and it works. So that's how the Cincinnati Reds got founded. And decent history. They won a championship in 1919. They won a championship in 1940, relevant to our good friend Marge Schott. Our enemy, Marge Schott, they win a pennant in 61. And so this is around the time that like she's starting to get invested again because she's also now a little bit richer than she was as a child, even coming from the booming plywood industry. She's now got all this money, so she starts doing big charity functions with the Reds. The thing is that 61 pennant is the peak for a while. Things go very badly for a little bit. I don't know if you guys have heard this, but in 1965, the Cincinnati Reds traded a former MVP. And the next year, with his new team, he not only won the World Series, but he also won League MVP, becoming the only ever person to win League MVP in both leagues. That player was Frank Robinson. Orioles was the team that had that championship and MVP. It was their first one ever in 1966.
Good old Frankie.
Yeah, good old Frankie. That is to say the Reds not having a good time. That's the most notable thing that happens to the Reds in the 60s. They trade away Frank Robinson. But all this means that the ownership gets a little ornery, and so they want to divest some of these older families that have had it. And so in comes, in 1971, this guy Louis Nipper gets his manager Sparky Alderson, and in the 1970s, we have something called the Big Red Machine. Arguably one of the greatest lineups ever created. We are talking Pete Rose. We're talking Johnny Bench. We're talking Tony Perez, Joe Morgan, Ken Griffey Sr., Dave Concepcion. It is a absolute murderer's row of a lineup. And so they win 2 titles, 1975 and 1976. The team starts to have to sell off the way that baseball teams naturally have their life cycles towards the 80s. And Louis Nippert also decides to sell off in 1981. The people that buy the majority stake, Williams Brothers. The Williams Brothers' names are James and William.
William Williams?
William Joseph Williams, but his name is William Williams, and
They call him like Bill, or is it literally just William Williams? Like
it is William Joseph Williams Sr. because he then named his son William Joseph Williams Jr.
I mean, if I was stuck with that curse, I would definitely make at least one other person have to live.
It has to be passed on now. It is indeed
Williams
the family
Jr.
curse. So they buy the majority stake in 1981. This is, though, when Marge Schott gets her minority stake. She gets her foot in the door, and then a couple years later, when the Williams brothers, James and William Williams, decide that they do not want to own the Cincinnati Reds anymore, in 1984, Marge Schott becomes the first ever woman to purchase majority stake in a Major League Baseball team. She is, for the record, the second ever woman to own a Major League Baseball team. The other one was an owner for the expansion Mets. When the Mets first expanded, Joan Whitney Payson of the New York Whitney family, related to, the Whitney Museum of Art, if you're an art head. But Joan Whitney Payson was an expansion owner for the Mets. However, this was the first time that someone bought a team, and that someone happened to be a woman. So, in some ways, a trailblazer. And, I mean, here's the good that we can sum up real quick from Marge Schott's ownership. In 1990, the Cincinnati Reds do win the World Series. That is most of the good from Marge Schott's tenure. Something that I should also point out, in Marge Schott's first year, they hire Pete Rose as player manager. That win does only come the season after they fire him midseason because, he's banned from baseball for the rest of his life because of betting. It is Lou Piniella that takes them to that 1990 World Series. But other than that, she's not a good owner. She's not a particularly good owner. She thinks she's a very good owner. But, we've already touched on some of the worst things that she's done. I want to make it clear, Marge Schott is an equal opportunity bigot. Let's just go through some of the other absolutely terrible things that she's done.
Some quick hits.
We've already covered the good Jewish people. We have covered African Americans. Let's go ahead and say that she never wanted any players to have pierced ears because only fruits wear earrings. So there's that. In regards to Asian American kids, she thinks it's not right for them to be outdoing, in quotes, our kids. That's from a Sports Illustrated article that I got a lot of these direct quotes from. And I'm sorry, our kids. So I have to go back to the Marge Schott. She also never learns anyone's name, including many people that work for her. She just does not have any interest, calls everyone honey, sweetie, making any connection with any person. So it's doesn't think any female reporters belong in the locker room, didn't really have a preference for hiring women of childbearing age, as she put it, doesn't really want them on. Now again, on that one, and on a lot of this, she was molded into this person by some very bad influences in her life. And for all villains, you should be able to see that track. You know, she's not able to have kids. Same time, one of her sisters, Lottie, has 10. She has definitely, to some extent, this inferiority complex. She thinks that she's protecting family values by not hiring women of childbearing age because she was brought up in a German Catholic upbringing where that is the end-all be-all. Sure, that's how you were brought up. It's also possible to respect new information that's given to you throughout your life and grow and change as a person. And again, on top of all of that, the number one thing that she picked up from Walter Schott, she is so cheap. She is so cheap. We are talking pick up pieces of scrap paper out of the trash can because it was only written on one side, cheap. We are talking about keep the thermostat at 55 in the winter, not only in the Reds building, but in the car dealerships that she also still owned at this time. She is so cheap that I want to play a game with you guys. I have 4 little news blurbs in front of me about how cheap Marge Schott was, and I want you to tell me which one of these 4 is not real. 3 of these 4 are correct.
Okay.
1 is not.
I got this.
Ready.
I got this.
All right. Number 1. She required a minimum of 3 competing offers for any kind of purchase, including anytime they had to just reorder office supplies. Number 2. She once canceled the paid service to have out-of-town scores posted in Riverfront Stadium.
I think that was true.
She once asked at the end of a season for a newspaper that they had sent headshots to for publicity purposes to return those headshots. And she raised the price of a hot dog to $11.50 in 1996 dollars, equivalent to about $20 today. Which of those 4 is not true?
I think the last one is fake. I'm pretty sure the hot dog one is fake.
I'm going to go with the headshots. I think the headshots is fake.
All right. We'll go one by one. She absolutely required competing offers for everything, including any time they had to make even a $50 purchase of paper clips. She required that she sign any check above $50 and that it have that minimum of 3 competing offers for it. Regarding the out-of-town scores, following the 1994 players' strike, she did indeed stop paying the $350 per month to have out-of-town scores posted there. Fans already paid to see this game. She did after 6 games revoke that, but for the rest of that month, her own staff had to manually be keeping track of scores, like from radios and stuff, to put up until they could resume the service. In 1995, they did request at the end of the playoffs that the New York Post return the headshots that they had sent at the beginning of the season. Xavier, you were correct. The hot dog is the correct one. The reason I picked that,
Yes.
Here's another thing about Marge Schott. The price of a hot dog at Cincinnati did not exceed $1 for the 15 years that she owned that team. The reason I picked the figure $11.50 is that was actually the most expensive price for any seat that was not a luxury box in the entirety of Riverfront Stadium her entire time owning the team. She did want people to come see baseball. She even would sometimes come to the games early and just pick children at random. 20 or so kids and their families, just let them run onto the field to like the edge of the outfield and back while her dogs were also running around. She does often have St. Bernards. She would have one at a time, always named Shotzi. So there have been many Shotzis, but it's always Shotzi. And all of the Shotzis reportedly did defecate all over the baseball field anytime they were running around it. But yeah, she would let the kids run out on there. One story that I felt like she believed that she was put on this earth to create children. And a weird thing about Marge Schott is she loves children. She even like treated the families of her players sometimes phenomenally. There's this one story about Brett Boone, who had elbow surgery the same day that his wife gave birth to their first child. Gave birth in Cincinnati. He had to travel to Birmingham, Alabama to get the elbow surgery. He comes back to Cincinnati, and Marge Schott is there with his wife and then stays for hours more after Brett Boone comes back. He's all like loopy from having had his elbow operated on earlier that day. Brett Boone even said, like, it was weird. She was great to our families, absolutely terrific, but she treated us like shit. And that's everyone that works with her hates her. The single worst person I have ever known, spiteful, mean-spirited, and evil. Here's another good one. She is the most cold, calculating person I've ever known. To feel sorry for her is ridiculous. Here's something that I think is also very important about villainy. We've discussed the tragic origin story. You know, you've seen where maybe if you were a weaker person put in those circumstances, you too would fall. Now, we, of course, didn't. No redemption for taking the wrong path for understandable reasons. You still took the wrong path. But you have to be able to see how they got started down that path. You also need them to have a little bit of their just desserts. And here's the thing about Marge Schott. She is tragically lonely. Absurdly so. She cannot watch games with all those children that sit down there because Riverfront Stadium, being a dome, had certain smoking regulations, and she cared so much about smoking, this thing that her father started her on as a child with cigars that is going to just keep consuming her life, that she would still go to her luxury box to sit alone with her dog just so she could keep smoking. Then she'd drive the 20 minutes home to her mansion, which, human being-wise, was completely empty. Based on this same reporter that had the Sports Illustrated article, filled to the brim with stuff, still in the 90s, had, you know, her dead husband's suits. Then she sits alone, watching this small TV and drinking vodka and water. The brand of vodka that she uses, the three of us were in a fraternity. We get this very cheap vodka called Vlad. She got a vodka called Kamchatka. I looked it up, about half the price of Vlad. She got a cheap vodka that was twice as cheap as the worst possible brand of vodka we could get. 1996 is her final season where she is operating day-to-day operations. She ends on a curtain call for the ages. The first game. It had been snowing a little bit before the game. Opening day, she's a little grumbly about the snow. And then, umpire John McSherry collapses at home plate, later dying of a heart attack that day. The game is postponed. Upon learning this, Marge Schott is quoted as saying, "I don't believe it. First it snows and now this." So that's how she starts the 1996 season, by commenting on the umpire that fell and died on her field. The next day, she takes some flowers that had been sent to her, removes the card from those flowers, puts a different card on, and sends it to the umpire's room in Riverfront Stadium as her belated condolences. During this whole time, this is the season with the scoreboard fiasco. So that's also happening for the first 6 home games of it. 10 days after umpire Todd McSherry's death, she goes to home plate to try and apologize to the umpires that day. Except none of those umpires were working that game. One of them even just turns his back to her. And then later on in the season, she makes a comment about Hitler, essentially saying, he started out building roads, but then clearly went too far. And hey, here's the kind of fucked up thing, is that Marge Schott is basically banned from baseball for the remainder of her career ever for saying, in a statement where she does say Hitler went too far, I'm not saying that that's good. I'm saying there are people that say much kinder things about Hitler now that are still allowed to exist in polite society. So we should all aspire to be as judicious as we were when Marge Schott, after making those Hitler comments, is removed from day-to-day operations of the Reds. She will stay removed from day-to-day operations until she is finally forced to sell the Reds in 1999. But in the end, she is rich enough to avoid any real consequences other than leaving the team. She even has enough money to continue what are a list of impressive philanthropic efforts. Does donate enough money to build an artificial lake at a nearby Boy Scout camp that is now named Lake Schott. She donates enough money to the zoo for a whole new elephant wing, where an elephant named Shotzi was moved in, still alive to this day. Shotzi is a living legacy of Marge Schott. She even donates enough money with the foundation in her will to the University of Cincinnati, and they temporarily named the University of Cincinnati baseball field Schott Field. That is posthumously, because she does, in 2004, pass away after her third trip in as many years due to smoking-related complications to the hospital. She does catch up with her, again, undone by her own hubris. Every part of the villainous story is so good. She dies essentially completely alone, and the only things now that outlive her, following that 2020, are actually pretty much Shotzi the Elephant and Lake Shot, because that baseball stadium, following the summer of protests against police brutality with the George Floyd killing in Minnesota, all of that leads the University of Cincinnati to respond to a petition submitted by several alumni and students to rename it. It is now just UC Baseball Field. So Marge Schott has been appropriately wiped from history, or at least treated as history should treat people that espouse those views. It's a little sad maybe that we don't take that quite as seriously now as we do. But Marge Schott had layers, like an ogre. Crazy lady. And I think easily one of the greatest villains in the history of baseball.
There's a lot more you could have said about Marge Schott, too. I'm pretty sure I read the same Sports Illustrated article that you did a while back when I first learned about her. And all of the other things
it was a huge jumping off point for the research this time. Look, if we wanted to make this entire episode Marge Schott, I could keep just telling you things that Marge Schott has done. But we got what I think is, you've got your origin story, you see all of the bad actors that make her into the person she is, and then you see her rise and downfall. And thank goodness that there's a downfall. We don't get enough of those for our villains in society these days.
Fair enough. Okay.
So Marge Schott is a villain. And we love to hate her. And I would love to hear who you both hate.
Real quick, a couple of shout-outs. One of these is for Diaz. People that I was very close to bringing up, but decided against. First off, Reggie Evans.
Oh, Reggie Evans. Reggie Evans is not a villain. Reggie Evans is a person that does what it takes to win.
So,
did he hit some guys in the nuts? Sure. So it was only to win.
You literally sound like you're describing a villain.
So Reggie Evans, known for about maybe 2 to 3 things in his career. One of them, of course, being grabbing Chris Kaman by the balls during a game in order to get a rebound.
Firmly grasp it.
Another one, and this is a deep cut for Philadelphia fans, traded to the Sixers in 2007, along with the draft rights to Ricky Sanchez.
Rights to Ricky motherfucking Sanchez. I got to give one other deep Reggie Evans memory. Those Pistons teams that were so great and went to like 8 consecutive Eastern Conference Finals. Mm-hmm. One year they played the Sixers in Game 1 in Detroit. Reggie Evans had the game of his life. I don't remember his exact stats, but like he was balling out. And, we're up maybe 3 with like a minute left. Reggie Evans gets it about 20 feet from the rim. And if you know anything about Reggie Evans, whole game is rebounds and putbacks. You never want him shooting the ball, ever. Pulls up the 20-footer right in Rasheed Wallace's face. It was the most no, yes shot I've ever seen in my life. Nothing but net. Sixers go on to win that game. And it was a competitive series. They lost in 6 to the Pistons. But, Reggie Evans wasn't just grabbing nuts. He was also grabbing my heart.
The heart is located in the nuts.
It really, it's a pathway there for sure.
Yeah, so I wanted to bring up Reggie Evans just for that. I had a feeling Diaz would have something interesting to say about him too. The other quick shout out, Claude Lemieux, part of the only father-son duo in NHL history to ever both get punished for biting players. If Lemieux didn't win multiple Stanley Cups, a Conn Smythe, and a silver medal with Canada in the 1996 Hockey World Cup, maybe I would talk about him, but a little too distinguished despite his biting ways. So instead of that, I'm going to talk about a guy who never won a trophy, never played in the Stanley Cup final, never made an All-Star game, never even cracked 30 points in a season. This guy was only good at one thing, but he was the best at that one thing. Do you both remember Ty Domi?
Yeah.
I don't. Wait. So, am I going to steal your thunder if I say the Flyers thing right now?
Yes.
I'll let you get to it. Then.
Yes, I will be talking about that.
Teaser, folks. There's a Flyers thing. I'm gonna rant about it later, but go ahead.
There's always a Philadelphia connection to these things. Tahir Ty Domi was born November 1st, 1969 in Windsor, Ontario, to Albanian immigrant parents. He grew up in nearby Bell River, Canada. He started off playing minor hockey for his local Bell River Rink Rats, It didn't take long for him to gain a reputation as an enforcer. Ty Domi might not be a villain, but he has some villainous moments and was definitely an enforcer and a pest. So when he was 14 years old in a minors game, he was being taunted by a man in the stands who was wearing a chicken costume. So Domi had just gotten into a fight with another player and later said, "He's hitting the glass, making all the fans laugh. So I said to him, 'You're next.'" Domi went back to the locker room, took off his equipment. Quote, "I climbed back upstairs and there was the chicken waiting for me. I beat the shit out of the chicken. He was 6'6". He had the head off, but everything else was on. Beat the shit out of him. He ended up in a cop car with the chicken man before the cops let him go." Ty Domi grew up to be 5'8", and at the age of 14, he was maybe close to 5'2", and fought a 6'6" grown man in a chicken costume right after a minors game. And
I don't think he fought him, Xavier. I think he made it very clear he beat the shit out of him.
Yes, he beat the shit out of him. That is true.
I can't even if we're gonna say 5'2" to 6'6", this is a 16-inch difference. How does he even reach his head to punch him?
He goes for the heart, and as we all know, the heart is in the nuts.
So Ty Domi, as a 5'8" enforcer, makes a habit of fighting larger individuals. There's a lot of grappling involved. If you grapple someone, you can get their head lower. So I would assume, I do not know, I was not there this day in the 80s in Canada. I would assume maybe the chicken man had less of a reach in a giant chicken costume, and a couple grapples and punches to the head were possible. But I digress. We're getting off to a great start with Ty Domi here. In 1986, he was drafted in the 7th round of the OHL draft by the Peterborough Petes, which is the oldest continuously operating team in the OHL. It takes him a little while to get his feet wet, but in his second season, he ends up with 292 penalty minutes in 60 games. That will be a recurring theme for Ty Domi.
That's almost 5 a game.
It's one major penalty a game.
Yes.
Routinely.
So, in 1988, Domi gets drafted in the 2nd round, 27th overall, by the Toronto Maple Leafs. He spent the 89-90 season in the AHL with their affiliate, the Newmarket Saints. In 57 games, he had 25 points and 285 penalty minutes. He gets called up to the Bigs, has a quick cup of coffee, 2 games with the Maple Leafs. Would you like to guess how he did in those 2 games with the Leafs?
0 goals, 0 assists, and 12 penalty minutes.
That would be what I would say.
0 goals, 0 assists, and 42 penalty minutes in 2 games. He gets into a fight his first shift ever in the NHL.
So that's
one
third misconducts in both, right?
1/3 of those games he spent in the penalty box.
I'm absolutely astounded.
So I mean, what the math comes out to is that he got 1 minor penalty, and he got a fighting penalty. He got 2 fighting penalties in each game, and the game misconduct in each game.
Yes,
that would be.
I believe the math would work out if that was the case. Yes.
Misconduct, 1 minor, 42 minutes. What the fuck?
And as you might expect, he did not play much with the Maple Leafs after that, at least for now. So in the offseason, he gets traded to the New York Rangers. He spent the 90-91 season in between the Bigs with the Rangers and the Binghamton Rangers, their AHL affiliate. Over a combined 53 games, both in the AHL and the NHL, he has 18 points and 404 penalty minutes.
Love that.
He is spending more time in the box than actually playing the game. He actually talked about this later on, where he was getting maybe a little too into fighting, and one time Mark Messier had to take him aside and tell him to chill the fuck out. So in this game, it was a game at the Garden. Domi scored, had an assist, and had a fight. And he rode his stick like a cowboy, went a couple rounds with an imaginary speed bag after his fight, and made a big ass of himself.
Wait,
So
he rode the stick like a horse after the fight?
yes.
Love this
So
guy.
so in the locker room afterwards, Messier pulls him aside. Domi thought that Messier was going to tell them where they were going to go out drinking that night. Messier said, "You got to chill the fuck out. Enough's enough. Cut that stuff out, or you're not going to have a career in the NHL." After that moment, he didn't stop fighting, but he chose the right times to fight. Domi ends up getting traded to the Winnipeg Jets, the original Winnipeg Jets. He continues his fighting ways, but fine-tunes it a little bit. In 161 games across 3 seasons, he accrues 724 more penalty minutes.
The ratio's dropping a bit, I think.
You know what you're getting. Any team at this point that's putting him on the ice, like, if they're going to pretend like they're upset with this, that's absurd, because he has clearly shown you every step of the way this is exactly what you are going to get.
While in Winnipeg, this is actually interesting. Later on in life, Domi said that he always considered fighting a personal issue, where you decide if and when you want to fight. And so a Winnipeg teammate once suggested that Domi should fight a particular player. Domi's response to him was, "Do you want me to break my stick over your head?" Nobody tells Ty Domi who and when to fight. Ty Domi decides that himself.
Nobody makes me bleed my own blood.
A villain's code of honor? This is wonderful.
So Domi, in April of 1995, gets traded back to the Maple Leafs. This is where he really blossoms in his enforcer role. On October 14th of 1995, in a game against the New York Rangers, Domi sucker punched well-known pest and most hated man in hockey, Ulf Samuelsson. Came up from behind, punched him right in the face. He was suspended for 8 games and heavily fined. Domi later insisted that Samuelsson provoked him by calling him a dummy repeatedly. And so, the only answer if someone calls you a dummy a bunch of times is sucker punch them in the head.
You got to prove the thesis. You say, "I'll show you a dummy."
But again, everyone hated Samuelsson, so most people didn't really care because people did not like Samuelsson at all. So a lot of people were kind of cool with what Domi did, but he did get suspended 8 games. In the 1997-98 season, he sets a Leafs single-season record with 365 penalty minutes, surpassing the record that had previously been set by Tiger Williams. Tiger Williams is the man with the most penalty minutes in NHL history, but this record Domi gets for most in one season with 365 in 80 games.
Still nearly a major every single game.
Yeah.
That, like, the small sample size ones, those are fun and silly to hear. But there is something about an 80-game season averaging a major penalty every single night.
Diaz, are you ready for me to set you up for what I assume will be a big Flyers rant?
I am so ready.
All right, so the date is March 29th, 2001. And Ty Domi is in the penalty box. Diaz, what happens?
So Ty Domi is in the penalty box. And it's very important to clarify, they're playing the Philadelphia Flyers in Philadelphia. And if you know anything about Philadelphia fans, it's that we are a rough, tough bunch. And I would say it is the dream of every Philadelphia fan to get the opportunity to fight physically an opponent. And on this day in 2001, there was one lucky fan, perhaps unlucky, depends on how you want to look at it, decided that it was time. So the fan is jawing back and forth with Ty Domi. And Ty Domi, as he is wont to do, has the water bottle, gives the fan a little squirt. And the fan's very upset, presumably a couple beverages deep, tries to go up over the glass to get at Ty Domi. The issue is the glass breaks while the guy is on top. So this Flyers fan falls down into the penalty box. He's now in a very vulnerable position. And as we've already discussed, Ty Domi is a villain. Ty Domi is not going to fight honorably. He's not going to allow this man to get his bearings before they start fighting. He just starts wailing on this fucking fan that has just fallen probably 5 or 6 feet. Not a huge distance, but he fell into the penalty box. And Ty Domi just starts beating the shit out of this fan.
I would almost contest that. I don't know that there's any dishonor if this is a dude that just broke the barrier. He chose to cross that threshold. His decision, landed him, as we would say in Dungeons and Dragons parlance, prone, and Ty Domi proceeded to beat the shit out of him. I don't see anything dishonorable about that for Ty Domi. It's not good. That's a neutral level of honorable.
I do want to say he was the initiator by squirting the water bottle at the fan.
Oh, come on. An athlete can squirt a water bottle at a fan.
Well, so the interesting thing here is he did not squirt the water bottle at this guy first. So what happened was a different fan was heckling Domi. Domi reaches over the glass, squirts a different guy. Then this guy, seeing that, goes to jump on the glass. When he's on top of the glass, then Domi squirts him, and then this guy falls through the glass. Domi beats him up, and the refs separate them.
20-year-old hot take. Ty Domi did nothing wrong.
I do have a side with my Philadelphia brethren, but there's a very large part of me. Listen, and I'm all for, like, I love booing. I think fans should be able to voice their displeasure with players at all times. I also believe that the players don't just have to take it. The players can give it back just as much. So while I am sad that a Philadelphia fan did get their ass beat by Ty Domi, I also love it because, like, as much as it is the fantasy to get a chance to get at one of the players, I'm sure the players just as much would love to be able to just beat the fuck out of, like, one of these ignorant fans. And sure enough, Ty Domi.
I mean, again, according to Xavier, that's how Ty Domi's career started.
Yes,
Very
it
true.
is.
This is almost his full circle moment right here. Started with the chicken, and it ended with the cheesesteak.
So Domi also sees the humor in this. After the game, when he's talking to the media, Ty Domi says, quote, "It's nice to see the fans get involved, I guess." Domi gets...
Ty Domi's a phenomenal villain. He's got good one-liners, also important.
It's very good. He does get fined $1,000, which was the maximum amount under the CBA, but he does not get suspended for this.
You mean a hockey player could just pay $1,000 to fight a fan? Why are they not doing that more often?
There should be an on-ice promotion. Be like, the fan in section 120, row 8, seat 4. Congratulations. Make your way to center ice.
I don't understand why this isn't happening all the time.
Gary Bettman can soar to number 1 in the Remember That Guy commission rankings. Gary, if you're listening, if there's an intern with the NHL that's listening, please get this on his desk. Let the players fight fans for charity. For charity. Not just for, shits and gigs. For charity. And I'm telling you, attendance will skyrocket. There's no drawbacks. Make them sign a waiver. I get that. But, let's do it. Let's just do it.
Yes, will be first in line.
Oh, absolutely. This is how you get me back to a hockey game. I haven't been to a Flyers game in probably 2-3 years. I will go to the first one that they announced this for, and I'll keep going until I'm the lucky fan.
So, Ty Domi, a month later, does something that I would consider his most villainous, the most purely villainous thing that he's done. Because Ty Domi has fought a lot of people. He's fought fans. He's fought a giant chicken man. But mostly it's fighting people who wanted to fight him. But on May 3rd of that year, 2001, the Maple Leafs are playing the Devils in the Eastern Conference semis. And Game 4, the Devils are up 3-1. 10 seconds left. Game's just about over. Ty Domi elbows Scott Niedermayer in the head, away from the play, while Niedermayer is skating away. Completely blindsided him. Total cheap shot. See the video. Domi just comes up, throws his elbow up in the air because, again, he's 5'8". He's a short guy. Niedermayer's unconscious. They have to stretcher him off of the ice. Domi gets suspended for the remainder of the playoffs with the condition that if the Maple Leafs don't make the next round, it becomes an 8-game suspension to start the next season. Maple Leafs do lose to the Devils in that series, and he is suspended for the first 8 games of the 2003-2004 season. Not the best thing for Domi. 2001-2002 season, I should say. But even with that, he plays another couple more seasons with Toronto. On June 30th, 2002, Domi's rights get traded to Nashville for an 8th-round pick ahead of his unrestricted free agency. He re-signs with Toronto anyway 2 weeks later and has his highest scoring season ever with 29 points in 79 games. He plays till 2006 until He even celebrates his 1,000th game in the 2005-2006 season. However, on March 10th, 2006, Ty Domi is a healthy scratch for the first time since the 1999 playoffs. Ty Domi does not take this well. Ty Domi throws a fit, states publicly to the media how unhappy he is, and stays in his hotel room instead of coming to the arena. He ended up arriving during the second period, caused a big scene. They tried to smooth things over. He plays a couple more games, but it's clear that things are not going to end well, and the Leafs buy out his contract. And he retires shortly after that. That is how Ty Domi's career ends.
He can fight players, he can fight fans, he can fight chickens. He cannot fight the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Not after, he was there for a long time, but ego gets in the way. Domi ends his career as the NHL all-time leader in fights. So in 1,020 games, Ty Domi has 333 fights and 3,515 penalty minutes. He ends up as the third all-time in penalty minutes, only behind the aforementioned Tiger Williams and Dale Hunter, who was briefly the coach of the Capitals a couple of years ago. 3.5 penalty minutes per game and a fight every 3 games.
That's almost, based on what you've told me, fewer fights than I would have expected. But wow, that's still a staggering amount.
He had more fights than points. But yes, Ty Domi, the NHL king of fighting, which I think is fantastic. A couple other non-career things I want to mention real quick. So when Domi was a kid, he grew up preferring soccer and baseball, and also played a little bit of football. According to Ty Domi's website, he was scouted by the University of Michigan for both football and soccer.
This is a Canadian kid who's like, nah, not hockey.
Well, remember, his parents are Albanian immigrants.
It's true. Doesn't have the maple syrup coursing through his veins yet.
And so Domi actually does play in the amateur Toronto-based Canadian International Soccer League during the 1995 offseason, and also appeared as a place kicker for the Toronto Argonauts in 2 preseason games.
When was that? Like while he was playing with the Leafs?
I believe so. Unfortunately, his website does not list that, but does say that he appeared in 2 exhibition games for the Argonauts as kicker. And in 2009, Domi competed with Canadian Olympic skater Christine Howe on the first season of Battle of the Blades.
The celebrity reality competitions are such a staple here, and I'm very glad that we have not neglected that this time.
And Battle of the Blades is great because this show was literally take one hockey player and one figure skater and pair them together. The first season was 8 hockey players and 8 figure skaters against each other, and Domi finishes 4th that season.
Pretty good.
Yeah, not too bad. He did better than a couple guys, including Bob Probert, one of his normal fighting opponents. Unfortunately, Claude Lemieux does finish 2nd that year, so he might have gotten enforcer bragging rights for that. Ty Domi also has a son named Max, who was drafted in the first round of the 2013 NHL draft by the Arizona Coyotes. Max plays for the Columbus Blue Jackets, where he is a teammate of Cole Sillinger.
I really appreciate that. I like that we're having callbacks.
And the last thing I want to bring up, because you can never really take the enforcer or the pest out of hockey. During the 2012 Ivan Hlinka Memorial Tournament, which is an under-18 internationals competition that's usually rotated between Slovakia, the Czech Republic, and Canada, Max is playing this tournament, and Domi is there, to watch his son. And Domi gets in trouble, almost causes a little bit of an international incident. A Swedish coach had set up a camera on a tripod to film the Canadian practice, which was legal. Domi goes over, steals that camera, and just takes it with him. The Swedes complain, almost cause a big issue. Domi does return the camera, but he keeps the battery.
What a dick.
I know. And that is the story of Ty Domi.
Dude, his whole identity, right?
It's very good.
That's unreal.
That's a second phenomenal villain. A villain that I can get much more behind, because Ty Domi, not a bigot. Appreciate that very much so. Again, I do apologize for that aspect of Marge Schott, but so many other interesting things about her. Domi, though, doesn't need that because he beat up a chicken when he was 14.
You
Also,
know,
he was 5'8" that whole time.
some 14-year-olds are busy choking the chicken, but Domi was busy beating the fuck out of the chicken.
Which could still be just as bad.
That could also be a euphemism for masturbation, but I just had to get in a very lowbrow joke very quickly before I get into my guy for the evening. So, somewhat related to Domi known for his fighting, and I've gone with a boxer today, and I would like to tell you all about El Orgullo de Masaya, Nicaragua. Se llama Ricardo El Matador Mayorga. Ricardo Mayorga is who I would like to talk about today. So Ricardo Mayorga is a boxer from Nicaragua, and he is known as potentially the most insane asshole in the history of boxing. And there's several reasons for this. We like to start with the origin story with these villains. Growing up in Nicaragua, Central America, one of the most impoverished places in the world, certainly. And when you grow up in extreme poverty, people will go to whatever resorts they can to be able to survive. So Ricardo Mayorga falls in with gangs. So he's a gang leader from a very young age in Nicaragua. He's a go-getter. I mean, the way he describes it is, it was barrio contra barrio. It was neighborhood versus neighborhood. And you would bring whatever you could get. So, they didn't have the best weapons. They would bring pipes that they found. They would bring rocks. Of course, you can't leave home without your machete. So they'd also bring their machetes to these.
Why are you looking for other weapons if you have a machete, though?
Well, you need backups, right? Because, after so many slices, the machete gets a little dull. The rock is more of a ranged weapon. So you need options. But thankfully, before he gets too old, he's able to find a way to reroute his aggression. So he ends up attending a military school in Managua, and the military school had a boxing program, and so begins the athletic career of Ricardo Mayorga. So for the first half of his career, he's really just bouncing around South America, not fighting for a lot of money, just taking whatever fights. Matador goes out there and he fights a fighter from Guyana by the name of Andrew Lewis. And Andrew Lewis is a fairly renowned up-and-coming boxer at this time. This is expected to just be a tune-up fight. And people who follow boxing know that a lot of times champions aren't fighting the very best. They'll fight a B-level fighter to be able to warm up for the big fight. And this was supposed to be the B-level fighter that Andrew Lewis gets to fight to prepare himself.
It's Michigan and Appalachian State.
Exactly. It's Michigan and Appalachian State. And in the first fight between these two, it's actually ruled a no contest. There was an accidental headbutt that Mayorga gave. Was it accidental? Who's to say? He at least made it look accidental. So he didn't get a DQ, but the headbutt did open up a pretty nasty cut on Andrew Lewis. So this was ruled a no contest, and months later, they have the rematch. And in the rematch, it is very decisive. Ricardo Mayorga dominates the fight, very surprisingly. And in the fifth round, he gets a TKO, and he becomes the WBA welterweight champion of the world. So now he has a belt. He deserves a chance to fight another real fighter, one would say, right? So he goes on, and he fights Vernon Forrest. Vernon Forrest, very, very good welterweight in his time. The books have Forrest as a very substantial favorite. People are expecting Forrest is going to get him out of there in 3-4 rounds. This was an impressive victory that he had over Andrew Lewis, but Vernon Forrest is considered world class versus just contender status. Ricardo Mayorga doesn't want to hear any of that shit. Gets a knockdown in the second round. There's another knockdown in the third round. Forrest does get back to his feet, but when you get back to your feet, the ref will always ask, are you okay? Do you want to continue? And it's imperative that the fighter responds. Forrest just has glazed over eyes, is unable to respond to the referee's commands. So it's a TKO, and Ricardo Mayorga gets the win. People are thinking, wow, this is really Mayorga coming onto the national scene now. People are taking notice, and as is naturally the case, you get an upset, the former champion gets an automatic rematch clause. The rematch is the first fight that I remember watching Ricardo Mayorga, and I fucking fell in love with this dude because in the fourth round, so mind you, Mayorga already has a little bit of the psychological advantage knowing that he knocked out Vernon Forrest. And, for the first 3 rounds, it's a very steady back and forward fight. And in the fourth round, Mosley catches Mayorga with a really nice 1-2, very clean on the chin. Like you see Mayorga's head pop back. You're like, oh, that hurt him. And Mayorga he has his hands up. He gets caught with the 1-2. He drops his hands and he smiles at Vernon Forrest and then taps his chin and says, do it again. Vernon Forrest loads up another 1-2. Boom, flush on the chin. He nods at him, smiles again, puts his hands behind his back and says, hit me again. Vernon Forrest again, with all the force that he has, throws a 1-2 at Ricardo Mayorga, pops his head back. And he starts laughing at him in the middle of the ring and then comes back with like a wild flurry of his own. Forrest falls. It isn't actually a knockdown. But just in that moment, you could just see Vernon Forrest had zero chance of winning this fight because psychologically, Mayorga has just absolutely dominated him.
I would run away. That's terrifying to hear about.
This is why you don't fight guys with machetes who have used those machetes in the past. Because you're facing someone who's already stared down death at some point. So they know that whatever you throw at them, it's not going to be as bad as fighting another gang in pitched combat with machetes and pipes.
Things that hurt more than fists. Stones, pipes, machetes.
Exactly. So yeah, Mayorga is a very seasoned veteran by this point. After the second victory, now Mayorga is really kind of on the national scene, so to speak. And what makes him a bad boy is his training methods. So his trainer is Stacy McKinley. Stacy McKinley has to think of some unconventional tactics to use with Mayorga because Mayorga, having grown up in Nicaragua, he is a very, very volume drinker and smoker. When not in training, he will smoke 2 packs a day and he'll go through a case of beer by himself. That's routine on a day when he's not in training. So McKinley had to think like, okay, how do I manage? Because Mayorga very clearly grew up in a gang, grew up in Nicaragua. This is not a guy that cares about much of anything. So if McKinley lays down the law and says, hey, we're training, there's no drinking, there's no smoking, guess what? Mayorga's going to drink and smoke. There's nothing you can do about it. This is a direct quote. He says, okay, that's fine. We're going to make a deal, though, champ. What's the deal going to be? Monday through Friday, you're going to train. You ain't going to smoke. You ain't going to drink no beer. On Saturdays, you can sit behind me. I'm going to get you a case of beer and a pack of cigarettes, and you can go through that all day. You got to understand one thing. He was going to do it anyway. It was my way of managing it. I had to manage it. You got to be thinking outside the box. So I think it's really important. When you're managing people, you need to know the best way to manage them. Sometimes laying down the law isn't necessarily going to work. Certainly won't with Mayorga. Mayorga was asked about in an interview with the Wall Street Journal in 2008 why he refused to give up smoking and drinking. He said, that's how I became world champion and I like it. Very simple answer.
I mean, if you could train doing that to your body, you only got to do the fights, like twice a year max if you're at that level?
In current day, yes, the top guys are only going to fight twice a year. Back then, it was more like 4 or 5 times a year still.
Okay.
Mayorga was fighting once he got to the prime of his career, which is where we are now, about 2 or 3 times a year. So I mean, that's still roughly in line. After the back-to-back decisive victories over Vernon Forrest, he fights Corey Spinks. He does lose a majority decision. It's one of those back and forth, but Corey Spinks ends up winning. His next fight, Eric Mitchell, it's a unanimous decision. Nothing really to say there. Then he fights, personally, my favorite boxer of all time, Felix Tito Trinidad.
Trinidad!
From Puerto Rico, El Orgullo de la Isla. For people who don't understand, Tito Trinidad is, in terms of Puerto Rican athletes, Clemente is one. Not as far behind as you would think is Tito Trinidad. I go to my tia's house down in Puerto Rico. There's the crucifix, and right under and beside it is a poster of Tito Trinidad. It's that big down there. But in the build up to the Tito Trinidad fight, there's not too much crazy back and forth. He does get his shit talked in as he does. but this is also Trinidad's comeback fight. So Tito had not fought in about 2.5 years at this point. In the 4th round, Mayorga does his classic tactic, puts his hands down, says, hit me, hit me, hit me. Tito's a very composed fighter, though. So he doesn't take the bait. They have a solid fight. Tito's winning, but in the 8th round, Tito ends up taking over, scores 2 knockdowns, vicious knockdowns. I want to say these are punches that any other man would have been unconscious. And Mayorga beats the count both times. And then finally there's a 3rd knockdown. And the 3 knockdown rule was not in effect, but the way his body went so limp, I want to say Mayorga would have beat the count. But the ref just instantly was like, this is like permanent brain damage happening right now. We're gonna call this right now.
Yeah, the whole like hit me in the middle of the fight strategy doesn't seem like a great long-term fight strategy.
It certainly will add up and catch up to you. So after he loses to Tito, he ends up fighting an Italian man by the name of Michel Picarillo. He wins that fight, gets the light middleweight WBC title of the world. And now we enter into what is truly the pure villainous phase of Ricardo Mayorga, because his next fight is against Oscar De La Hoya. Everybody knows who Oscar De La Hoya is. Oscar De La Hoya was very much a pretty boy.
He's the golden
boy. The golden boy, Oscar De La Hoya. An incredible fighter, certainly. But for a rough and tough Nicaraguan that has been drinking a case of beer and smoking a pack of cigarettes a day, the pretty boy is, not really gonna go too well with him. So he says in the lead up to the fight, and this is gonna be one of the more innocent comments that he makes. He says of De La Hoya, "I want to kill him. I want to stop his heart with my right hand." And this is as good as the comments get that he says about Oscar De La Hoya. He says some very misogynistic and homophobic things. Mayorga had a thing where, about 2 years prior to this fight, Oscar De La Hoya fought Bernard Hopkins, Pride of Philadelphia, one of the great champions in boxing history. And Hopkins knocked De La Hoya out with a body shot. It was a great liver shot. Anybody who knows anything about boxing will tell you, like, the worst punch to take is the liver shot. I would take 10 punches to the jaw before I would take one well-placed liver shot, because you literally feel like you're dying. It's the most excruciating pain you can possibly imagine. And one of these caught De La Hoya, and he goes down. He's pounding the canvas in pain and is unable to make the count. Mayorga doesn't buy it, though. Mayorga thinks that this was a dive that he took to make some money. So he says in a press conference, and this is a loose translation, "Tell your wife to screw you the morning of the fight so you don't take a dive like you did against Hopkins, you F word."
Huh.
So pretty aggressive. And it doesn't just stop at the misogyny and the homophobia. It is even internal racism. So he says, "You can't even represent your race, bitch. All the Latinos are with me." So De La Hoya obviously doesn't take a lot of this. He says back, "You disrespected the 2 things I love. First, you disrespect my wife, and now you mention my race. This isn't a game. I'm going to knock you out." And sure enough, Oscar De La Hoya is a world-class boxer. And he does get the 6th round knockout against Mayorga. But the one thing I want to say, and this is what I love about boxing, you can be the biggest dickhead, asshole, villain of all time, but when the fight's over, there's respect. Mayorga did come up, give De La Hoya a hug afterwards and say, "Hey, listen, it was all to promote the fight, no hard feelings, blah, blah, blah." So, somewhat redeemable, maybe. Said some horrible things. We go to his next fight is against Fernando Vargas. Fernando Vargas is another Latino-American fighter, somewhat of a pretty boy. Vargas wanted to make it clear to Mayorga from early on. So, before they even have their first face-off, he said, listen, if this guy, says anything like he said to De La Hoya, I'm not going to take it. Mayorga is on the mic at the first press conference, and he's going on and on about, tell your wife, come over to my house if she wants to see a real man. And Vargas just, very calmly gets up and walks over, says, "Hey, what the fuck?" Mayorga slaps him across the face. And then Vargas starts wailing on him. The camps separate them before anything too intense happens. But Vargas said that he was going to defend his honor. And so he did, until the actual fight happens. The actual fight happens, gets a majority decision, does Ricardo Mayorga, which sets up his next super fight. And this is where really his villainy and his misogyny comes to a head, one would say. In 2008, he fights Sugar Shane Mosley. who is another one of my favorite boxers growing up. Mosley has to kind of know what he's doing, but brings his girlfriend to the press conference.
Terrible move, sir.
Right. They go through the press conference. There's words back and forth. There's nothing too crazy, right? But then they go for the face-off. Everybody knows the face-off. You know, when you see the boxing posters, the two guys staring at each other. So they go for the face-off. And Shane Mosley's girlfriend, you know, just like bends over to like tie her shoe right before the face-off. And Mayorga sees his opportunity, gives her a nice smack on the butt. And of course, they immediately start brawling. Obviously, just cannot stand. So they start brawling. Afterwards, they asked Shane Mosley's girlfriend about it. I mean, she's like, you know, like that was so disrespectful. You know what? Like, I'll give him $10,000 if he'll like come on stage and just stand there for 5 minutes and let me just punch on him. Mayorga's comeback to this is, how about I pay her $25,000 and I get to slap her on the ass again? This is a guy who knows who he is.
Yeah, we can
And he's just
definitely
gonna lean
say
into
that.
it.
He is self-aware.
There are those who say that this whole incident was staged. The WBC actually, so the World Boxing Council, did investigate to see if it was just completely staged. They didn't find anything to that effect. At any rate, if it was staged, if it was organic, either way, not a great look for Mayorga, and if it was staged, a horrible look also for Mosley. But again, horrible looks are kind of the theme that we're going for here, right? It's we're looking for the assholes.
Absolutely.
So they fought twice. Mosley actually got knockouts in both fights. So good for Sugar Shane to be able to defend his girlfriend's honor. But, you know, there's something to say towards the idea that this was planned, because well afterwards, so this was in an interview that Shane Mosley did in 2020. Shane Mosley said about Mayorga, he talks crap, that's what he does, but it's not really as bad as he wants you to think he is. He does have a sharp tongue and a big mouth, though, especially if you can understand what he's saying. After the fights with Shane Mosley, nothing else really significant to note in Ricardo Mayorga's career. But there's one other aside that I want to mention to really just illustrate how insane that this guy is and how little he cares about anything. The last Mosley fight was in 2015. His previous significant fight was Miguel Cotto in 2011. He had 2 tune-up fights against some guys between then. But in 2013, in the span of 7 months, Ricardo Mayorga fought in 4 MMA bouts. He is only trained as a boxer. He has no jiu-jitsu training. He has no anything else training.
Get in the cage.
He wanted to demonstrate that he is the tough man that he says that he is. He's not afraid of anything. He said, I'm the best fighter in the world, and I can fight under any rules, and I'm going to go in, and I'm going to prove it. In his first fight, he goes on to prove this, actually. He gets a knockout via a knockout knee. Not even a punch, via knee. The problem is his opponent was down at the time, and if you know MMA, you are not allowed to throw a knee at a downed opponent. This was overturned to a no contest. So officially, after one fight, he is 0-0. That was May 3rd. On July 27th, he has another fight in Nicaragua against Rene Martinez, and he loses by submission to a guillotine choke. In October, 3 months later, he fights Sergio Ortiz. This is a controversial split decision that he also loses. So, of course, after a controversial decision, you got to go to a rematch. We got to find out what's going on. So he fights Sergio Ortiz again 2 months later in December, and this time he submits to an armbar. So in the 7-month MMA career of Ricardo Mayorga, he has 1 no contest and 3 losses. But even though he lost all those fights, I think it still does very well to illustrate the point that, you know, this is a person that, as he said, grew up as a gang leader and doesn't fear anything. Cares about nothing except showing how much of a man he is, right? In the classic toxic masculinity sense. Ricardo Mayorga, El Matador, El Loco, as he's known, both nicknames. I've never seen anybody else in all my years of watching boxing do the straight up hands down hit me. I've seen people get hit hard.
Like asking to die. It's truly like someone could kill you with that. Sure, he clearly had some confidence that he wasn't going to die, but he could have.
Exactly, and like, you know, it's one thing to like get caught with a really strong punch and like smile and laugh at him, but to just straight up take your guard down. And I would encourage anybody listening, like, look up Ricardo Mayorga goes crazy against Vernon Forrest. It's the most remarkable, bizarre thing I've ever seen in a boxing ring. Pure villain, pure asshole, pure misogynist, homophobe, a villain. And that is the
Pure
theme.
uncut villainy. All three of these really, really, really great. Which I mean, I guess that leaves us with one task, and that's to decide who amongst them is, I suppose, the best villain. Not necessarily the most villainous, because I feel like if you're going to go most villainous, it's probably the person that owned any kind of Nazi memorabilia.
I was
And
gonna
I'll
say,
go ahead and say I would like to disqualify Marge Schott. I do not want Marge Schott to go at all.
I have one thing to say here, and that is only one of the three of these people does not have a history of racism, misogyny,
Yeah, no, like
homophobia.
I'm leaning towards Ty Domi 100% because, yeah, he's the one who isn't on record of being, like, bad. He definitely hurt a lot of people, but he hurt, for the most part, it sounds like, except for Scott Niedermeyer, consenting adults. Mayorga probably hurt some. Well, okay, you know what? I guess it's the question. If you're engaging in gang violence, how consenting are you to the violence? That's not something that I have any kind of qualification to demarcate on. I do appreciate most of the times. How do I want to phrase this? Here's what I like about Marge Schott and Mayorga as their villain arcs. They do both get their comeuppance. Is Ty Domi falling to the Leafs sufficient villain comeuppance? I think it could be, but in order to have that full, complete sense of it, is just deciding, you know what, the one fight that I've always needed to tackle is this franchise. You know what, as I say it out loud, that's so perfect. If it was like some silly hockey anime or something, yeah, of course the very last boss fight that he takes on is just the franchise itself that he's existed with.
The other thing that I would just say is, as we have referenced many times throughout the history of this podcast, that we do have a character clause. So if we're going to abide by our character clause, I don't think we can have Marge, how bad was Hitler really shot in? I don't think we cannot. I don't think we can have Ricardo, women are property that I can just slap their butts anytime I want, Mayorga in. So I think, process of elimination, I think it's Mr. Flyers fan beater upper himself that's gonna take it.
He's the most villainous on ice, but not villainous as a person that we have here. So we can enjoy the topic without putting in someone who is an actual piece of
bad
shit
person.
Human being.
Yeah, we don't want bad people in the hall.
We don't want Nazis. We don't want racists.
They were fascinating to talk about. I'm thrilled
against his own race. I want to say that to me that's impressive because, and it's not even internalized racism, just racism.
Well, look at how misogynistic Marge Schott is. Both of
very
them.
true.
They're both. Your hubris has blinded you. They are phenomenal villains. I'm happy to have discussed them. That being said, if we are talking about the entrant of the Hall of Guy, it sounds unanimous to me. Diaz, would you like to do the honors?
Congratulations to non-misogynist, non-Nazi, current and new Hall of Guy inductee, Ty Domi. Congratulations.
Congratulations, Ty Domi. Congratulations, Xavier, for another.
Dare I say, new name, Guy Domi.
Guy Domi?
God.
Let's run it by him. See, if he doesn't like it, he might kill us.
He could.
But if he does, it'll have to still be spelled G-I-E.
Yeah, it'll be a portmanteau, if you will.
The picture going on his plaque is 100% him beating up the Flyers fan. Now that I know that it's the Flyers fan's fault, that's awesome. I don't like that he did the Scott Niedermeyer thing, but him beating up that Flyers fan, no, he's 100% in the right for that.
It was
very good. I'll send you the video.
Well, with that, we've reached another end of the road here, folks. We thank you for going down this road with us. It was a little bit of a darker road than usual, but we still came out on the other side with a bright light on the other side. And that bright light is Ty Domi and his beautiful career. And that is all we have this time until we journey down another road next week. Anything else to say, fellas?
Ready to go bowling.
Yeah,
Shout out Pete Weber.
Everyone enjoy
Shout out Pete Weber.
Shout out Pete Weber, and shout out to you, dear listener, for joining us once again. I have been your host, James.
And I have been the very special guest, Xavier.
And I'm your other co-host, Diaz. And as Harry Callis once said, this guy is out of here.
Good thing this is just the game.